千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Zi. So I want to just reiterate that this chapter is known as De Shan Zhang, the virtue of goodness chapter. It's a chapter that talks about a central and important concept in the Tao. It talks about how Tao sages are able to exert such a natural yet powerful influence on everyone else. It is something that I've been very privileged to experience, encountering real-life sages in the past, and it is something that I aspire to attain one day for myself. That ability to effortlessly, naturally bring the best out of everyone around me, and of course, including myself. So I think as we go, you're going to see exactly how Tao sages are able to accomplish what they do, and also some of the examples that we see in the world today that match the description of the Tao sages exactly. Now, the chapter itself is not very long, 12 lines. And again, since it's been a while, it's been a week, let me just go ahead and read through it from line 1 to line 12. The sages have no constant mind. They take the mind of the people as their mind. Those who are good, I am good to them. Those who are not good, I am also good to them. Thus, the virtue of goodness. Those who believe, I believe them. Those who do not believe, I also believe them. Thus, the virtue of belief. The sages live in the world. They cautiously merge their mind for the world. The people all pay attention with their ears and eyes. The sages care for them as children. Now, previously, we were able to divide it up into 4 sections, as you see here. So let me point out a few things. We have the introductory section, where we talked about constant mind versus the mind of the people. And indeed, this is where we ended up last time. Now we're about to head into a couple of very significant sections. The section coming right up, the second section, is about the virtue of goodness. And you see that labeled in line 5. That whole thing is about the virtue of goodness. As we talk about this more, I think you will begin to understand and appreciate how important and powerful that is. Then, after that, there's the virtue of belief. And when we talk about it, you will notice one thing about Chinese characters. The thing to note is that the character that's translated as belief here is actually pretty versatile. It can also be referring to faith and trust. So belief, faith, and trust. It operates as all 3. In English, we can only pick one, so that's how the translation goes. But when we discuss it, we're going to talk about all those different aspects of belief. And then lastly, the conclusion that I hope that we'll get to today, very important, summarizes everything. Keep this in mind for now. The last section summarizes all previous sections, especially sections 2 and 3. That is, The last section, the conclusion, is all about bringing together the virtue of goodness and the virtue of belief. So what did we talk about last time in regards to lines 1 and 2? Well, it was mostly a discussion about the constant mind versus the mind of the people. The constant mind is what the sages do not have. The sages have no constant mind. And this is because the constant mind is fixed. It is dogmatic. It is inflexible. The mind of the people is one that incorporates multiple perspectives because nobody knows everything. The sages understand that, and therefore they try to figure out more about the truth by being able to see it from different angles. Therefore, last time we got into a contrast and comparison between the constant mind and the sage's mind. So the constant mind is something that manifests arrogance and oftentimes anger, hence the emoji that you see at the bottom there. It is not something that the sages would incorporate for themselves. It is not something that they would exhibit or manifest because it has so many negative qualities associated with it. It is something that pushes people away. The sage's mind is the opposite, is what you see on the right-hand side. It is a practice in humility instead of arrogance. It is not about anger, but about learning opportunities. It is about not getting into debates that devolve into arguments. It is about building relationships rather than pushing people away. So this is what we went through last time. Then I also wanted to make the point that from constant mind to the mind of the people, it's not either or, it is not an on or off switch. Most often, it is a spectrum. And most of the time, you and I are somewhere on that spectrum. That is, there are times when you and I can be pretty stubborn. We may as well all admit it to ourselves and to one another. We can be pretty stubborn sometimes. And there are also times when we can be more open-minded, more flexible. So we vary back and forth. We go back and forth on this spectrum. And my invitation to you before was to take a moment to think about where you are on that scale, where you tend to be as you interact with other people. Do you dig in your heels, become even more entrenched in the face of an opposing opinion? Do you take a moment to consider the possible merit of the other position? I think this is actually pretty tricky. The reason is because oftentimes this is something that hinges on, what I say here, hinges on self-awareness. Because those who think that, oh, that's not a problem for me, I'm open-minded, I am intelligent, I am well-informed. The people who have that certitude, who have that certainty, are usually the ones that have this issue, the constant mind. Constant mind is usually unaware of itself. On the other hand, if you find yourself worried about that, perhaps I was too harsh, perhaps I was too judgmental, perhaps I was this and that. Well, if you worry about it, it means that you've been reflecting upon your thoughts, your words, your actions with other people. If so, congratulations, because self-reflection tends to lead to self-awareness. Not always, but oftentimes it can. And therefore, you are far less likely to have a problem with the constant mind. You are much more likely to incorporate, as the sages do, the mind of the people, multiple perspectives. And in the past, when I have encountered people who definitely possess the constant mind most of the time, they think of themselves as having the mind of the people, the second line. Why? Because they oftentimes socialize and speak to other people who share their perspective already. So when they say, I incorporate multiple perspectives, they're talking about their circle of friends who all think like they do. So incorporating multiple perspectives in that sense is actually just incorporating different versions of the same perspective, minor variations. So something to watch out for, easier said than done. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So then this is what we talked about before. How do we go forward from here? Well, for one thing, I wanted to use a real world example, thinking about the fact that we are now approaching the holiday season. There's going to be, within limits because of the current situation, there's going to be some gathering, maybe virtual gathering in some cases like we're doing now, but it definitely brings to mind gathering with family and friends. And sometimes, we have these fun little memes that have become popular in recent years about those family gatherings. And the memes are about the types of relatives that can show up. So one meme that we have is the crazy uncle. And we probably all know someone who has a crazy uncle, even if we don't have one ourselves. Then the other fun meme that has become popular is the fun aunt. The fun aunt seems to be diametrically opposite to the crazy uncle. Now, this is what the memes say, but since we're cultivating and practicing the Tao, we want to definitely note that when we talk about the crazy uncle and the fun aunt, we are really talking about how the crazy uncle can also be the crazy aunt. It's just a sort of a label of convenience that we're putting on that mentality. The fun aunt can be the fun uncle. So it isn't just the uncles that can be crazy. Our aunts can be crazy as well. It isn't just the aunts that can be fun. Our uncles can be pretty cool uncles. So with that in mind, with that out of the way, let's explore the crazy uncle versus the fun aunt in terms of constant mind versus the mind of the people. They kind of represent these concepts really well from 2,500 years ago. It's just a nice coincidence that we have these memes that are floating around today that seem to match. We know, based on our knowledge of the memes, that the crazy uncle is self-centered. The crazy uncle just wants to tell you what he thinks about the world. And a lot of times it's best at family gatherings to not even bring up the topic with the crazy uncle, because then he's going to start and he won't stop. The fun aunt is not self-centered. The fun aunt is more concerned about you. How are you doing? How's school? How's everything? Do you have a boy/girlfriend yet? The fun aunt is concerned about you. The crazy uncle is more concerned about himself. So that's one difference between constant mind versus the mind of the people. Then we also know from the meme that the crazy uncle tends to be extremist and domineering. Not permitting, allowing any opinions other than his own, and getting very extremist in his beliefs. Whereas we know that the fun aunt is much more moderate and easygoing. So the feel of these different kinds of relatives is quite different and diametrically opposite in some cases. So this is how it is in our North American culture. And the crazy uncle is definitely gonna be talking about conspiracy theories. If you give him a chance, he knows a lot of them. He likes talking about them. He likes to give dire warnings about how you are in the dark, you don't know the truth, etc. Conspiracy theories. So opposed to that, instead of that, the front end is pretty well informed on current events, does not suspect there's something dark and sinister going on, just taking current events as they are, becoming pretty well informed from multiple sources, and is closer to the truth than actually the crazy uncle, even though the crazy uncle is convinced just the opposite. And this is because, in connection with the conspiracy theories, the crazy uncle feels the world is a dark and dangerous place. You know, there's dangers lurking everywhere. There's manipulation going on behind the scenes. There are these organizations unknown to most that are perpetrating the cover-ups, hoaxes on the people, etc. This verges on paranoia. So this is something that's characteristic of the crazy uncle. What about the front end? Well, instead of feeling like the world is a dark and dangerous place, the front end likes to take nieces and nephews to cool places. Because the world doesn't have to be dark and dangerous, it can actually be cool and fun. And let's continue on. You know you can't really change the crazy uncle's mind on anything. You can attempt to argue, reason, provide evidence. None of it really works because the constant mind is fixed. The constant mind is inflexible. It's dogmatic. What about the front end? Well, the front end is concerned about you. She listens to you. She takes your ideas into account. That's more like the mind of the people. So as always, just like before in the previous slide, where we compared and contrasted the constant mind with the mind of the people, the crazy uncle merits the same emoji, while the front end will go to the other one, as you can see. So it's basically anger versus peace. It's basically inflexible versus flexible. So again, these are meant to be exaggerations. There may be elements of the crazy uncle and the front ends in the same relative. It is important, though, for us to recognize where the archetypes come from and the characteristics associated with them. This is not to point any fingers, but to use an exaggerated comparison to make the point about the difference between the constant mind and the mind of the people. And now we're ready to progress beyond lines 1 and 2. Let's get into line 3. It's the beginning of this section on the virtue of goodness. Therefore, it is important. So the very first thing that I want to do is to point out a character that is reiterated twice. So I bring it out, I highlight it, and I want to tell you all about it. This is the character Wu. And what does it mean? Well, you can tell here in the translation, I'm highlighting the word I. And this is because that's what Wu means. It is the ancient form of Wo. Wo is used in modern Chinese, meaning I or me. Wu is the ancient form of that. Of course, they look nothing alike. That's just the way it is. So because Wu is the ancient form, I note that it is not commonly used in modern Mandarin. If you think about it, we have something similar in English. We have thou and thee, which are the ancient form of you. So we don't have the something that's directly equivalent to wu. But we know that thou and thee are not commonly used in modern English. It's exactly the same. We still know what they mean in English. We do come across them from time to time. It's the same thing with this character for Chinese. And then lastly, just to note, when Lao Tzu wrote using this character, I am good to them, I am also good to them, etc., he is using himself, he is referring to himself as a way to describe the sages in ancient times, ancient to him. Lao Tzu is basically saying, I learned from the ancient sages. The ancient sages are good to people, whether they are good or not good. So I, in emulating the ancient sages, I am the same way. I treat people well, whether they are good or not. So this requires a little bit more of an explanation. I find that most translations, most material available in English tend to skim over this at the surface level, and that's too bad because it's actually a powerful concept. There's a deeper layer to it. So this, when we talk about this, the section that we're on right now is actually lines 3 and 5. They are all one section, and they all talk about the virtue of goodness. Later on, we're also going to be talking about belief and trust. Right now, we're on goodness and kindness. So from 6 to 8, they're one section. Those lines form one section, and they're all about the virtue of belief. So hold off on the virtue of belief or trust for the moment. Swing back to goodness and kindness. So you're going to see that I've highlighted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations of this character set. And you can see the highlight in the translation. They're all translated as good. And the character itself means goodness or kindness. So these are the two aspects. The goodness and kindness, the belief and trust, these are the two major aspects of what I call the virtuous character of the sages. Sages they cultivate, manifest, and maintain this virtuous character, 德性, that naturally and powerfully affect other people to bring out the best in them, to inspire people to choose the best path for themselves, the right path, the path of the Tao. The sages do it by incorporating what you see on the screen. So let me talk about them one by one. Let me explain. So first, we zero in on the character that I mentioned just now, Sat. Here's the opinion on that. And the meaning, as I said, is good, kind, friendly, virtuous. These are all positive qualities. This character is intended to convey nothing but positive aspects of human existence. So in this context, what Lao Zi is doing is describing the universal goodness of the sage. When I say universal, what I mean is without discrimination, without distinction, universally good, meaning good to everybody. And that in turn means the sage treats all people with kindness, regardless of how they are. Let me pause for a moment and point out that most people don't really act that way. Most people are the other way, which is conditional. If people are nice to me, I'll be nice to them. If people are rude to me, I will be rude to them, double. I will throw it back in their face. So this doesn't mean that the sages are like a rug that you walk all over. That's not what it means at all. there's a deeper layer of meaning associated with that. I will explain. First of all, the realization, the first level realization, surface level, is that the sage's behavior toward others is not conditional. It is not based on judgment or morality. Rather, it's based on what we talked about, what we discussed in the previous chapter in terms of the Tao of knowing. These chapters all flow into one another, and you build your understanding of the Tao one chapter at a time. And when you get to a chapter like this, if you call upon your understanding from previous chapters, it really helps. So let me focus on this concept here in line 5 called the virtue of goodness. So virtue of goodness, 德善, is a major concept in this chapter. It's an underrated concept in the Tao in general. It doesn't get talked about very much, but when practiced correctly, in accordance with the Tao, it is very powerful. So let me describe it first, and let me talk a little bit about my personal experience. A true sage radiates the authentic virtue of goodness. People can sense this, and they gravitate to it. They instinctively know they can trust the sage. They know the sage expects the best from them, and they live up to it. Okay, so all 3 of these bullet points that I just read, these are exactly what I have experienced firsthand, personally, when I encountered the great true living sages of our times, some of whom have already passed away. So they all have this ability to inspire without saying a word. And my feeling as I interacted with these true sages is that they can see through me. They know who I am, how I am. They understand that I'm trying my best to be better. They see that, they zero in on it, and they bring it out without really any effort. And this is because I know that I am not perfect. I have good moments and moments that are not so good. Sometimes I live up to my own ideals. Sometimes I fail. Regardless, there's something in me that aspires to be better than I am, better than I was yesterday. That is what the sages are able to see in everybody. And that's what they bring out of everybody, including myself. So I definitely felt that I was understood. I definitely know that I can trust these living sages. I gravitate to it for sure. And I know that they expect that I will do my best. And there is no question that I don't want to disappoint them. I'm happy to live up to their expectation of me. So I try my very best. Quite willingly. It's not a struggle. It's not something that I have to convince myself. It's inspirational. So you may have had the same experience in the presence of a sage. You find yourself being and acting at your best. And perhaps initially, you may not even realize it. It's natural and it makes you happy. That's the power of the virtue of goodness. Why does it work that way? How does it work that way? Well, this goes back to the nature of human beings. Let me explain. Question: why are the sages good to everyone? Aren't there people out there who are so awful and terrible that they don't deserve any goodness? Okay, well, that's the common mindset. There, I've gone back to the mentality of asking who is deserving good treatment and who is not. We are differentiating people, separating people, categorizing them into a box labeled good and a box labeled bad. From that mindset, you may ask, well, are the sages maybe just naive? Are they too trusting? Well, no. They see the truth about people in general. So let me bring out this particular bullet item here. The sages have a basic belief in the essential goodness of all human beings. This is actually the topic of a philosophical debate since ancient times. Are human beings basically good or basically bad? So the ancient sages definitely believed that people are basically good. You may share in that belief. You may feel that people are basically good and decent, and you got to give them a chance, right? So a lot of times we hear people talk about that, and if that is what you believe, then definitely the ancient sages agree with you. Now, if you are convinced, as the ancient sages were, that people are basically, essentially good, then what about the bad people? We do see bad people in the world. You know, we don't have to put our heads in the sand and convince ourselves that everyone is good already at the present time. There are, quote unquote, bad people out there. So in this thought process, the bad people are the ones who have strayed far from their true nature. So there's a kernel of goodness in them, but they have gone pretty far away from it. Some of them will never get back to it. Some of them will never be given a chance to get back to it before they expire, before they no longer exist. Some people may live out an entire life being very bad, never get a chance at redemption, and then die, and that's it. Okay? No question about that. While people are still alive, there's always a possibility for redemption, however minute, however vanishingly small. Redemption is always possible. Indeed, we have movies, TV shows, novels, stories about redemption. And it is always possible because it is never too late to change for the better. It's never too late to turn around if you're heading down the wrong path, retrace your steps, and walk the better path. So this is what the sages believe. Now, this has been actually a cornerstone of Chinese culture since very, very ancient times. There's actually a classic about that. If you are talking about someone who has been classically educated in Chinese culture, they're gonna know what I'm talking about. This is well known among those who are classically educated. There's something called the three-character classic. I know you probably have never heard of it. This is one of those divisions between East and West, between the Chinese culture and the non-Chinese, where someone in Chinese culture is very likely to know about the three-character classic. Now, it's a wonderful opportunity that I get to talk about this with you because I realize the vast majority of people that are tuning in, whether live, like right now, or later on through YouTube, through recording, probably have not heard of it. So this is a wonderful opportunity for me to address that. So this is a sutra. The three-character classic is a sutra that begins by stating this belief. It is called the three-character classic because it's a long string. It's of poetic construction with 3 characters per line. And it starts out saying that people are essentially good, that they are good from the beginning. They can get tainted later on by influence, by negative influence in the material world, but they start out as a pure blank slate. This classic was written during the Song dynasty, which is about 760 years ago. So it's been around for quite some time. Now, here's what it looks like. Of course, at the time that it was written, it was much more likely to be on bamboo. Nowadays, it's published on paper, of course, in books and ebooks as well. The name, so what I'm doing here is that I'm taking the name from the bamboo scroll here, showing it down here, 三字经, and you'll see the pinyin romanization down here. The three characters you see here, the first character, 三, that's 3. 字, the second character, the one in the middle, that's character, sometimes translated as word. However, the difference between character and word is that a word in English sometimes can only be translated in terms of multiple characters. And then Jing, the last character there, that is the same character as the Jing in Daodejing. It means classic or sutra. So the name for this classic is a literal translation of the title. So let me tell you about what it says. And I'm happy to do this. It's what it says is not long. It's easy to explain, easy to understand. And yet it's something that's relatively unknown in the West. So great. First of all, it starts out with 3 characters, and remember, every line in this particular sutra is 3 characters. 人之初, the 3 characters, literally, the first character is person, and it could be plural, persons, but it's talking about human beings. So the second character there, that's just the apostrophe S. And then the last character means the start or the beginning. If you want to use of instead of apostrophe S, you will have to flip around person and beginning. So the beginning of people, or in the beginning, human beings are ... That's what the first line says. So then the second line, also 3 characters, 性本善. The pinyin looks like this, where the X is actually more like SH. 性本善. So what does that mean? The first character means nature. Second character means originally, and善, well, you've seen that multiple times already. It means good or kind or friendly or virtuous. So all people, when they start out, 人之初性本善. When they start out, they are good. They are essentially pure. They are blank slates. They, sort of like all of us, we know this. We see this in children. We see this in babies. A young child knows nothing of hatred, greed, violence, discrimination, racism, none of that. All of those things have to be learned. So there you go. You can tell just by looking, just by observing the world, that you can make a pretty strong case about people being essentially good, that they have a good nature. Now, if that is the case, if that is true for absolutely everybody, then even the quote-unquote bad people in the world have that center, have that core, that inner core of goodness that may be obscured at the moment, but they can get back to it if they have the right guidance. Everyone can get better by returning to the essence. Everyone has that ability. This is why redemption is always possible. All they have to do is to get back to the way they used to be as a young child. So this is the basis for much of the thinking in Eastern traditions in general, with the Tao in particular. So keep this in mind. This will make even more sense as we continue on. Now we're ready to explore the second part of it, which is about the virtue of belief. So as before, what I want to do is I want to isolate this character that's being repeated 5 times and to talk about what that is. 信. So the pinyin can be a little misleading. Just remember, X is always like SH. The meaning is believe, trust, if it's used as a verb. In Chinese, characters can function as a verb or as a noun, and we have a whole bunch of English words that are the same way. So it is not exactly something that's strange or different. So then, one thing that I want to note as you're looking at this here is that these 3 lines form the same poetic format as the previous 3 lines that talked about the virtue of goodness. So they talk about something similar, except a different aspect of the same thing. It's another way to describe how the sage treats people. Specifically, the sage believes in and trusts everyone. It does not matter if it is someone that other people consider to be untrustworthy or someone who does not believe in themselves. The sage will believe in them no matter what. It is also very important for me to point out here that the sage is not naive, not gullible, and therefore to say that the sage trusts everyone isn't the same as to say whatever you say the sage will accept at face value. Indeed, that is often not the case. So the sage incorporates the Tao in his or her actions every day, but what the sage does believe is the potential in people to be better. That's where the belief and the trust and the faith really functions. So let's continue on. This becomes a little clearer in just a moment. To put the whole thing together, the virtuous character of the sage, the power of the sage to affect and inspire people incorporates both parts. Both the goodness and kindness part, that's 德善, and the belief and trust part, that's 德信. So the sages incorporate both of these based on, number 1, knowing an individual. So think about how you come to trust someone when you know them, when you understand who they are, what they can do, what they are capable of, you believe in them. So the sages base their practice of goodness, kindness, belief, trust on knowing an individual. And sometimes they can know you better than you know yourself. Not the same as blind faith. Number 2, that's one part of it. The other part is that the sages know the fundamental positive nature of human beings. So, knowing the fundamental positive nature of human beings, that you can tell is not, just believing whatever you hear, right? It's about believing in the Tao that is inherent in everybody, regardless of how they manifest at the moment. So this, when you are faced with someone who has mastered this, you know that things are subtly different. In the presence of a sage, you feel understood. You feel honored. That's the reason why you want to live up to the belief that the sage has in you. It's that feeling you get when you know you will never ever want to disappoint someone. And this is how the sages bring out the best in everybody. So all of these concepts in the Tao definitely come into clearer focus when we illustrate them with examples and stories. For this particular one, when we talk about the virtue of belief, the virtue of goodness, there's a story that is particularly suitable. So that story is the friendship of Guan and Bao. So these are actually historical figures. So these are not fictional characters, but historical figures that once walked the earth. One of them, Guan. The other one, Bao Shuya. So what went on, what transpired between them is a historical account, things that actually happened. Their story is called Guan Bao Zhi Jiao. The four characters that translate to the friendship of Guan and Bao. Guan, this one here, comes from the surname of Guanzong. Bao, this one here, the second character, comes from the surname of Bao Shuya. Zhi, same thing, the apostrophe S, or of, O-F. Jiao, friendship. So let me tell you about this story. This story comes to us from the spring and autumn period, which is right before the warring states period, which was the time of Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago. So this was a little before that. So I can very much start out by saying once upon a time in ancient China, there were two friends who grew up together, Guanzong and Bao Shuya. When they were young men, they decided to go into business together because they had grown up together, they were friends, so why not? Let's go into business together. They agreed to be equal partners, and they were able to make a modest profit. However, when it came time to split the profits, Guanzong, the gentleman to the left, always ended up with more. People saw this and they commented on that it wasn't fair. They said, Guanzong is taking advantage of Bao Shuya. It's clear, it's taking more money. But we know how the business was started. Bao Shuya was the one who came up with the initial funds to invest in the business, to start the business. So he's actually the owner of the business, not his friend, Guanzong. Bao Shuya should take more. At the very least, they should split the profits 50-50. So why is Guanzong taking more than his fair share? So Bao Shuya heard this, and he said to them, you don't understand. I appreciate that you are well-meaning, looking out for my best interest, but you don't understand that Guanzong, he came from a poor background. He should definitely take a little more. I'm totally fine with it. So this silenced the critics. Later on, and this was because even before the warring stage period, during the spring and autumn period, there were already many battles going on between different factions, different kingdoms. Both of them, as able-bodied young men, were drafted into military service. On the battlefield, Guanzong would always stay in the back. People noticed that he would never charge ahead. He seemed totally lacking in courage. So they criticized him for this. What a coward. They disliked him because of it. But once again, Bao Shuya said to them, you don't understand. Guanzong has an elderly mother at home. He's the only child. Of course, he has to make sure he's okay. If something happens to him, who's going to take care of his elderly mother? And again, this silenced the critics. So later on in life, both of these men held positions of authority and responsibility. However, there was a problem. With Guanzong, he always seemed to have issues with his job performance. He got let go, he got fired from quite a few jobs because of it. Once again, people saw this and they mocked him. Couldn't hold down a job. Why, why so horrible at whatever job he happened to take on? Once again, Bao Shuya said to them, you don't understand. Guanzong had a string of bad luck. He had bad luck with the jobs. The jobs he found, they were just not suited for him. He's actually very capable. He will eventually do great things. So this wasn't quite convincing to the critics, but they went away mumbling to themselves. Sometime after that, the ruler of the Qi kingdom came to Bao Shuya with a request. The king said, we have gone through a period of chaos. Now we finally have peace. We have a chance to rebuild the kingdom. I want you, Bao Shuya, to work for me as my minister, to help me do the rebuilding. Now, you see, this was an amazing offer of a powerful position. It's a position that was second in authority only to the king. So any number of people would have killed to get that position. And this was being offered, it was dropped in Bao Shuya's lap. Surprisingly, Bao Shuya said, Your Majesty, I'm very grateful for this honor, but my abilities are not sufficient for such an important responsibility. The king was dismayed to hear this, and the king said, if you won't help me, how can I rebuild my kingdom and increase prosperity for my people? I want to attain greatness for my kingdom. Bao Shuya said, Your Majesty, I recommend Guanzong. This was shocking to the king to hear this recommendation because previously Guanzong had worked for his rival and not the prince. So he said, what? Listen, you should know that he plotted my downfall and it wasn't even that long ago. Guanzong is someone that I want to kill. And you're recommending him? Bao Shuya said, Your Majesty, he opposed you only because you worked for your rival at the time. In reality, he bears no ill will towards you at all. Indeed, he will make an extremely loyal minister to you, just as he was loyal to your rival. But, the king said, Your Majesty, Bao Shuya said, do you wish for the kingdom of Qi to be more powerful and stronger than ever before? More powerful and stronger than all the other kingdoms? The king said, well, of course. That's why we're talking. That's what I want. Bao Shuya said, then let bygones be bygones. Let Guanzong help you rule your kingdom. He is the one who can help you achieve all of your goals. Eventually, the king was convinced. So he ordered an elaborate ritual to bring Guanzong into his court as his primary advisor. So how did it go? Well, it was exactly as Bao Shuya predicted. Guanzong proved how capable he was. Qi Guo, the kingdom of Qi, became very powerful. The king of Qi Guo never regretted his decision to allow Guanzong to become his minister. Guanzong attained great success, even fame as one of the best at his job, the royal minister. When people asked him, he would often say, you know, my parents raised me and nurtured me, so of course I'm always going to be grateful to them, but the one who truly understands me, the one who truly helps me, my friend, Bao Shuya. So this is the story of the friendship between these two. Now, let me point out one thing. Bao Shuya was steadfast. He believed in his friend when no one else did. This should already remind you of the passage that we have just looked at. Let me bring up the next slide to zero in on that aspect of it. So Bao Shuya knew that his friend was not a coward. His friend was not a cheat. He knew that his friend was good. In business and in battle, he saw only the good in his friend, even when everyone else did not. Everyone else basically saw that Guanzong was trying to cheat by taking a larger share, that he was a coward by hanging back. Then, the virtue of belief in recommending Guanzong to the king. Bao Shuya believed in him, believed in his potential, his capabilities, even when everyone else, including the king, did not. They failed to see that. So now, let me pause for a moment. Let me ask about you, your life. Let me ask you the following question. Is there anyone in your life who knows you better than yourself, who believes in you, even if no one else does? Maybe your parents? Maybe your favorite teacher from the past? Or maybe someone in your life right now? Is there such a person? If such a person exists, how do you feel about this person who has this unwavering belief in you? And if you do not have someone like that, same question, but phrased a little bit differently. If you don't have someone like that in your life, someone who believed in you no matter what. If there was such a person, how would you feel about this person? And definitely feel free to type out your answer at me so we can make this a little more interactive. So think about that for a moment. Wouldn't it be great to have someone like that in your life? How would this person inspire you to bring the best out of you? Just as Bao Shuya brought out the best in Guan. Now, as you think about that, I want to flip the question around the other way. What if you can be that person for someone else? What if you can be the one to inspire this other person to bring out their best? So you don't have to be Guanzong, the person who was trusted and believed in, the person who was truthfully seen to be good. You can be Bao Shuya. You can be that inspirational figure for someone else by really knowing that person, knowing what they can do, knowing their essential good nature, and therefore, when they are with you, there is no question that they would live up to their potential. They will bring out their very best because that is what you expect of them. Now, contemplating those questions, you can see why the virtue of the sage is about the virtue of goodness, no matter who the other person is, and the virtue of belief, no matter what the person is. So this is excellent. I think we're beginning to see the deeper level of the meaning in this chapter. It isn't the surface level translation that you might have seen before. Yeah, the sage is good to everybody because the sage is so compassionate. The sage believes in everybody no matter what. Okay, great. That's the surface level. Now we're talking about how powerful that can be. It transforms lives. It's truly transformational. And that's one of the quote unquote secrets of the sage. Not really a secret at all. It's what they do. It's what they are. It's who they are as people. Naturally inspirational. So how powerful can it be if we now suddenly find a way to know how to be inspirational for others? That's the Tao. Let's continue on. Next line, line 9, we're talking about the sages now. 圣人. So previously, we already talked about 圣人 means sage or sages. Someone whose wisdom is divine. Someone who is sacred or approaching the sacred in being wise. Then, so that's the first two characters that you see, and then the middle character, that's a preposition. It can be at, in, or on. In English, we have a whole bunch of different ones. In Chinese, we have one character that can take the place of any one of those. Then, 天下, the last two characters, we have also talked about that many, many times. All under heaven, or just the world. So now you have enough to put all three of these together, and you can see that this line, if you just string literally, transcribe the literal meaning together, sages in the world. It is, the actual meaning is exactly as translated that you see here in line 9. The sages live in the world. However, the meaning, the actual meaning is not just these words, the sages live in the world. Let me explain. The meaning of this line is that the sages live Real sages live as part of our world, the everyday, mundane, secular world, the world in which we operate and function, the material world. They do not live isolated lives. Hermits are not real sages. Real sages know what's going on in the world. They have many opportunities to interact with people at all levels of spirituality. And people come in all shapes and sizes. Some people are complete novice when it comes to spiritual matters. Some have attained a degree of mastery. So bottom line, the sages are always with the people, not far away from them. Or I can summarize it in the following. Real sages are not hermits. Hermits are not real sages. This is so clear when you are able to read the original in the Daodejing. This is so clear. It is only when you don't have that understanding that we get into, our distortions and misunderstanding in the Western world, and we assume that sages are a particular way, but it's actually very different from the way that they are explained and described in ancient texts. So let's continue on. Let's talk about line 10. Line 10 starts out with this character, xi. It's repeated twice, as you can see. Xi, xi. What is that? Well, first of all, the meaning with the character by itself is to inhale, is to breathe in air, suck in air. So, xi, xi, what does that mean when you repeat the same character twice? Well, it's an expression. Usually, when a Chinese character is repeated twice, it is being emphasized for something. In this case, when you repeat it twice, it's a description of someone taking in a deep breath to be cautious. So if you think about how, for instance, Indiana Jones is about to replace the idol with a sack holding rocks and dirt, he's taking a deep breath and he's making the switch. He's being very cautious. It's that kind of feel. It's breathing in, oh boy, here we go, and then proceeding cautiously. So the two characters together means being careful or being cautious. Now, what about the last part here? Well, as you can see in the translation, it's about merge their minds. So the last part in the translation, you should be able to map that to the middle of this line here, 天下. And therefore, the last part of it, because grammatically we have a different structure in English than in Chinese, so we have to switch the order around. In this context, means to get involved. So this is why I say that when we talk about the sages living among us, not far away like hermits, this is actually reiterating the same idea. They are in our world and they are presenting the Tao perspective. They must do so cautiously. Why? So here's why. Let me explain. So first of all, the sages are careful when they get involved with the mundane world, and they are involved all the time. And the reason for their caution is already expressed in the previous lines. It is because the world contains all kinds of people. In lines 3 and 4, some are good, some are not. Lines 6 and 7 talk about some people can be trusted, some cannot. And I realize that we're now away from those lines, and therefore your recollection may not be very clear. That's okay. Let me show you what they are. So from 3 to 5, lines 3 and 4 specifically, we talk about those who are good, those who are not good. So right off the bat, that's talking about different types of people. Then lines 6 and 7, those who believe, those who do not believe. Okay, another distinction. And as I said before, these characters have multiple related meaning. Therefore, I can talk about those who are good as those who are kind, and then those who are unkind. I can talk about those who have faith, those who lack faith. I can talk about those who can be trusted and those who cannot be trusted. And I can also turn that around and say those who trust, those who do not trust. So in this particular case, in these instances, the same character operates on multiple levels at the same time to talk about the different kinds of people. So now that you see that, this is the reason for the caution. This means that the sage will gladly treat all of them well. The sage will believe in them, but not blindly, carefully, cautiously. And that's because they always maintain a healthy level of skepticism. They always are cautious to not take someone's words at face value. The guidance, the mentoring that someone needs may not be blind faith in them. You can believe in their potential and yet treat what they say with the wisdom, the practical wisdom of having lived and experienced the many different situations life has to offer. So let's continue on. I think we have just enough time to finish this chapter, which will be great news. So look at line 11. The people all pay attention with their ears and eyes. So let me talk about that, starting with ears. And this is the second to last character that you see in line 11. The people listen to what the sages have to say. So here, to bring up ears is to talk about listening, hearing what the sages have to say. I think that's easy to understand. Then we have the very last character, which means eyes. And this is watching, looking, observing, seeing. The people watch what the sages actually do. So it's no accident that is laid out in this way, because great many people are able to talk a great game, but can't necessarily live up to what they say. So the bottom part here that you see, watch what the sages actually do, that can be oftentimes more important than what the sages talk about. So let's put it all together. The people all pay attention with their ears and eyes. And when I say the people, that's referencing the first two characters here, 百姓. 百姓, the first character means 100, second character means surnames. 100 surnames is referring to the people. It's just a term to say the people, plural. So the people look to the sages as examples to follow. And they can sense false teachers who are not authentic. Now, I do have to qualify that and say they can't always sense false teachers who are not authentic, not always, but oftentimes they can. Usually, given sufficient time, people can figure out, sooner or later, the real teachers from the wannabes. So just a little more about this. So then the repeating characters that we saw from just a moment ago, that is actually a description of someone taking in a deep breath in order to be cautious. Okay, here we go. That applies to this line as well. So in order to serve as a good example, the sages have to be careful and cautious in the following ways. First, they have to practice what they preach. They have to be consistent in words and actions. So it's exactly like I talked about, because people are not just listening, they're also watching. Not just listening to what you say, but watching what you do. So you have to practice what you preach. That is the way of the sage, to be consistent. That's number one. Number two, the sages must be careful to always set a high standard for themselves. They do not permit self-deluding excuses for themselves. They're strict with themselves. And this goes back to the example that we talked about many times before about the ancient Chinese coin being rounded on the outside, squarish on the inside. So the sages are quote-unquote squarish on the inside, strict with themselves, easygoing with everybody else. Number three, be impeccable publicly and privately. So this also plays into the consistency that you saw. The sages do not behave any differently when they are alone or when they think no one is watching. So how do the sages do this? Isn't this going to cause a great strain for the sages to always be on 100%, no exception? Well, no, it's actually easy for the sages. The way they do the above is to integrate the Tao completely into their thought process, into their very being. And this means, in a very natural way, everything they do, everything they say, will just be virtuous naturally. Everything flows naturally without being forced. They don't have to think about it. Virtuous, consistent, having high standards, impeccable, that's just the way they are. Now, I think we're ready for the last line. First, I isolate one character, the second to last character there, hai. So the pinyin is the HAI, as you see there, hai. And it's not like hi, like like hello. It's hai. Now, as a noun, this means child or children. Here, it is not being used as a noun, it's being used as a verb. In this context, it's a verb meaning to nurture, like raising kids. So how does that apply to the sages? Well, let's bring in the entire line together to talk about that. The sages nurture people in the sense of guiding them toward the Tao. This involves the distinction between physical age and spiritual age. Regardless of physical age, people can be at different levels of their spiritual maturity. Therefore, someone who's elderly may actually not be very spiritual at all, or be still at a relatively low level, primitive level of spiritual learning. Remember the previous chapter, we talked about how the beginning point is the accumulation of knowledge. There are still many people at that stage, regardless of age. And then, to point out, this line summarizes 德善, the virtue of goodness, and 德信, the virtue of belief. And what does that mean? Well, it's easy to understand when you think about the mind of a parent. Desan, the virtue of goodness is all about, so put yourself in the shoes of a loving parent. And this is easy to understand. The parent treats the child well, whether the child is good or bad. The parent knows the child's basic goodness. So we've all been either parents or child, possibly both, quite possibly both. So you know exactly how this mentality works. You're going to treat your child well, whether the child is good or having a temper tantrum. That's just the way it is. That's all about being a parent. It's the same with Daodejing, the virtue of belief. The parent believes in the child, whether the child has the same belief or not. This is because the parent knows the child's untapped potential. So as a parent, when you look at your child, or as a child when your parents looked at you, it's always the same. The parent believes in the child's potential, vast potential, to do something great. So whether you have the same belief or not in yourself, the parent has that faith in you. This brings us to the very last line of our chapter, and we're just about to run out of time. So we're going to need to jump to the summary. Next time, when we come back in December, we will do the paraphrase, the full circle. We will talk about the last part, the concluding part, to wrap up 49. For now, though, we must go to the summary, which is all about the application of the Tao. So last time, I showed you this exact slide, but previously, we still hadn't had the time to talk about the virtue of goodness and the virtue of belief. This time, I'm going to show it again, and I hope that it makes more sense than before. First of all, see the potential for good in everyone. Now that you've heard the story, you've seen the examples, you've heard the explanation, I think this is very clear. I do know that with some people, this requires an open mind. You have to be, some people don't make it easy for you to be good to them. Some people are toxic. In the beginning of our cultivation, you still have to put some distance between yourself and them. Powerful, real sages are able to affect everybody. We're not quite there yet. And then understand the deeper motivations. You have to look deeper into other people to see that we're all doing the best we can with what we have. So together, 德善, the virtue of goodness. Then the other part, let's not forget, all about belief, faith, and trust. Realize that people want to be trusted. That's built into our very nature. And sometimes all they need is just a chance to prove themselves. Would you be the one to give them that chance? That is the question. Help them bring out their best and highest selves. When you provide guidance to other people, you are also guiding yourself. And you're guiding them and you toward the positive. This is the power of Daodejing, the virtue of belief. So I hope this summary screen now suddenly takes on way more context, way more meaning than when I presented the same thing, same information last time. Now, one more thing to talk about is gratitude, because we are now approaching / in the holiday season. So I want to talk about Thanksgiving. That's coming right up. The two characters that you see on this slide in red, 感恩, that's gratitude. It is also, when you add holiday into it, 感恩节, one character, adding one character to it, turns it into Chinese for Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving holiday. Thanksgiving is an excellent reminder for all of us, reminding us about the Tao of gratitude, to put the Tao of gratitude into actual practice, not just think about it, but to actually apply it to life. So specifically, we, all of us, you and me, we all have many blessings, some of which may be taken for granted. So my question to you, what are you grateful for in your life? What are the blessings that you may have taken for granted? I'm serious about asking this question. I'm actually going to start by responding to the same question. I am grateful for, well, many things. I'll just list out a few things right now. First of all, I am grateful for this group, for all of us. Think about the fact that we're gathering together from all over the world. Isn't that amazing? We're all coming together from different places, different time zones. I'm very grateful for that. Because I'm grateful for the opportunity to share the Tao and travel the path with all of you. Literally, we're on the same journey. We're all travel opinions. We're all travel companions, and I'm very grateful for that. And lastly, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I'm also grateful to Mark. He has worked very hard to make the Tao available on YouTube and Facebook. So please join me in thanking Mark for a phenomenal, fantastic job. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.